And I wanted to spend just a few minutes just to kind of wrap up some of the legislative activity. And I just think it helps bring some clarity to what's actually happening. So if you kind of, step back a little bit and go on a 30,000-foot level, so as of last Wednesday afternoon, the PPP has already approved $510.5 billion through 4.5 million loans. However, there is more than $100 billion in appropriations that is remaining. And I think that's kind of key to understand, just because that is most likely going to be impacting some of the decisions that they might be making and new legislations or acts that are going to be coming out. What we do know is coming up is something that was submitted last week. Well, actually, there was 14 things submitted last week, and I'm not going to go through all of them. However, the Family Savings and Flexibility Act, that is a bill that is currently being proposed to increase the contribution limits for HSAs. So as all of you know, with health savings accounts, they are pegged to an indexing rate, that was really kind of set, back when a number of years ago. And there's been a lot of, movement is probably the best way to describe it, but a lot of movement to increase the maximum HSA contributions to mimic the deductibles and out-of-pocket limits of expenses underneath an HSA qualified plan. They will have caps on them. Those caps are going to be based upon the out-of-pocket maximums for the individual coverage and the family coverage of a high deductible health care plan. So just kind of putting that in perspective is today we've got the limit of $3,500 or $3,600. I always have to look those numbers up. And that would actually be changing to just under $7,000 for an individual, and families would be just under $14,000. And then they're also going to be talking about the dependent care accounts. Those would have an increase from the $5,000 limits up to a $10,000 limit. So there's definitely some movement for helping participants in these types of plans to help redirect the premium dollars, obviously, into a health savings account. However, just some other activities that are happening is that we have the Paycheck Protection Program Second Chance Act. That was submitted by Senators Portman, Cardin, Langford, and Booker. And the focus of that is to allow the small business owners with a criminal record to apply for PPP loans. Because as you remember going through the PPP application process, that was a question. We do also have a bill being introduced, bipartisan bill through Senators Marcia Cantwell as well as Bill Cassidy. Cantwell's from Washington as a Democrat. Bill Cassidy is a Republican for Louisiana. Their bill is the Exposure Notification Privacy Act. This is a bipartisan legislation to protect consumer privacy and to promote public health and the development of exposure notifications technologies to combat the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And we even have bills such as the one from Representative Kevin Brady out of Texas. He's introducing legislation that is going to create a return to work bonus. And what that means is that under the proposal, workers would receive a payment of $1,200, which is, as you know, the equivalent of 2 weeks of unemployment benefits if they accept a job offer. And so that kind of goes back to, some of our early comments where there are some individuals that are electing to stay on unemployment, and I think the government is recognizing that. And so that's where we have some of these legislations that are coming out. And there's another 9 bills that are all related to COVID that have also been submitted, and I'm certainly not going to go through all of them right now, but there is one that I thought you'd find interesting through Representative Layhood. He's out of Illinois. His bill is introducing some type of a payment, tax break, or something to help with the costs of cleaning their locations. So there's a lot of activity that's, kind of being moved in the federal side. On the state side, right now we're adjourned. You may remember when I was speaking a couple sessions ago how here in the state is they adjourned and they didn't, and they adjourned and they didn't, and then they adjourned and they did not. Well, they finally adjourned Sendai on May 26, which means that the session was coming to a complete halt. They did push through a number of bills that were kind of already in the process, what we call is crossing the aisle. So there were a number of things that did go to Governor Ducey's desk for signature. However, even though they adjourned Sendai, they are anticipating that there is going to be some, if not one, there might be two special sessions that are going to be called to deal with economic issues and liability protections for that are happening through the outbreak. And specifically, you can see that the most recent estimate for our budget here in Arizona is that we're running a deficit that's going to range between $500 million to around $1.5 billion. So certainly that's a big range. And I know they're trying to kind of get, a handle on the budget. So we know that they are going to be coming back in session just to help kind of deal with these open issues. And then kind of going back to the liability protection side of things, I did talk about how the Arizona legislature, they were putting in some bills for liability protections. It did not pass, and it actually didn't pass both houses. It passed the Senate. However, they didn't get the 2/3 for an emergency election, which would have negated a 90-day implementation period after adjourning Sendai. However, it didn't go anywhere in the House anyway. Now, on the federal level, there is a couple things still moving. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did make this statement recently. This is just as of last week. He was working on a bill as well. So there is concern on the federal level, and his comment, if you can kind of read between the lines, is a little terse, I think, in his opinion of what might be coming down the pike as far as possible, legislation or lawsuits and activities. So from a federal, or from really just a legislative level to here in the state to a federal level, state's a little bit in hold right now until they figure out the budget. They probably will be introducing another COVID liability legal protections bill. But then again, if the feds do something, then kind of what Arizona typically does is follow suit and just kind of mimic what the Fed does. So that's kind of how we're watching this. So that's just a quick update on what's happening legislatively.